number of books have been written on India's first war of independence in 1857 with different interpretations and different focuses. Tatya Tope's Operation Red Lotus, written by one of his descendants, Parag Tope, with the help of his family members, is a quest to unravel the real story of Tatya Tope's contribution to 1857 war. The book covers the entire campaign from planning of the war until Tatya Tope's death. We spoke to Parag Tope about this book. Parag, first of all, tell us what inspired you to write this book.
My sister and I used to discuss about history, especially with my family, for many years. And then in 2006, there was a lot of talk about the 150th year being observed in India of the war of 1857. So my sister basically said, well, it's going to be a rehash of a lot of the same history that we have read before. And since you talk a lot about history, why don't you put your pen where your mouth is and we'll help you with the research. So that was really the inspiration. As a kid, growing up in school, whenever they used to talk about Tatya Tope in 8th grade history books, the classroom would turn towards me. So there was a sense that somehow being a descendant or a relative of Tatya Tope made us somehow different. So that was part of the inspiration as well.
Perhaps you have titled your book as Tatya Tope's Red Lotus Operation. Why so? What is the significance?
This is very interesting. The war started on May 10th, 1857, but several months before the war, red lotus flowers began to appear in garrisons where the native infantry troops were stationed. These were the Indian troops that worked for the English. And these lotus flowers would arrive from a runner outside, and he would give it to the subedar, and the subedar would give it to the sipahis. And they would pluck a petal and then hand the flower back to the soldier behind. And this went on from regiment to regiment, and then they would cry out, "Sab lal ho gaya hai," and then the cry changed to "Sab lal ho jayega." This has been mentioned in several history books, but no one so far has attempted to decipher what it actually meant. Was there really a code behind these red lotus flowers? So in our book, we have actually decoded this 150-year-old mystery and figured out that the red lotus flowers played a critical part in the logistical operations that went into planning of the wars. That's why we call it Operation Red Lotus.
And also you have chosen to call the story of Anglo-Indian War of 1857.
The simplest definition of this war would be an Anglo-Indian War. I mean, there was England on one side and there was India on the other side. The reason why historians have refrained from using the simple definition is because the concept of India as a state did not exist in 1857. The English could have chosen to call the company that they established in 1599 as an East India subcontinent of disparate kingdoms company, but they simply chose to call it the East India Company because India existed even for the English as a nation. So Anglo-Indian War of 1857 is a very simple and apt title.
Your book has not only talked about the detailed planning of the war, the strategy, the logistics, and it is complete with graphic details of the march to Delhi, Gwalior and other towns.
In terms of the operational planning of the war, our book focuses on the logistics, the economics and the planning. A few cities were targeted to be liberated. Delhi, Lucknow, Banda, Kalpi, Gwalior were some of the few cities. City after city, Indian soldiers marched about 1 million man-miles in the early months of the war. And this was a time where soldiers traveled about 10-15 miles per day. We had regiments that came in not only just from Meerut on the 11th of May, but also from Peshawar and Nasirabad and dozens of towns and cities around Delhi. Same way, soldiers marched into Lucknow, they marched into Banda and many other places and liberated them in a matter of weeks.
As you yourself mentioned, that stories of the chapatis and red lotuses and their significance in India's first war of independence had baffled many historians. You have, of course, demystified the meaning of the Red Lotus operation and what it signified. What did these traveling chapatis symbolize?
In continuation of the red lotus flowers, there was another interesting set of events that took place where chapatis were being made by outside runners, and they would come to a village and sometimes offer 2, 4 or 10 chapatis, and they would hand it to the mukhya or the chowkidar of a village who would call the people there, and they would be asked to make the same number and sent to the next village. And this went on for village after village until thousands of villages had got these chapatis as messages. So what we decoded the chapatis as implied supply line where the women were committing themselves to make chapatis for the soldiers when they would march through the villages, so that the planning could take place without revealing that the Indian troops were planning a massive war against the English.
The description of the brutal response of the British to India's War of Independence of 1857 is not only hair-raising but also reveals the desperation of the English.
In the first phase of the war, the soldiers dependent on the villagers, especially the women who volunteered themselves to cook for the Indian soldiers when they marched through their villages. The English response was targeted exactly towards that. They did two things. One thing, to protect their own soldiers, they used their women and children as human shields, and thereby tying the hands of the Indian offense towards the English soldiers. The second response was far more chilling. What they did was starting a campaign from Allahabad to Kanpur. It wasn't just a scorched earth campaign. We call it actually a figure of eight campaign, because it was targeted towards not just villages and farms, but villagers, including women and children. So village after village was plundered, where everyone was burned down or hanged. In fact, there wasn't a single tree left along the river Ganga where there wasn't a dead body hanging. In fact, one soldier who has been assigned to hang people, out of boredom, hanged several families into a shape of a figure of eight. That's why we call this, the English retaliation, as a figure of eight campaign.
There is also a mystery about how Tatya Tope died. Was he hanged or was he shot? Tell us more about the last march.
There have been several interpretations about Tatya Tope's death. A common thread in the family, for example, was that the man who was hanged on April 18th in Shivpuri was not Tatya Tope. So pretty much whether it is the North Indian side of the family tree of the Topes, or whether it is the Maharashtra side of the family tree of the Topes, it's a common theme that it wasn't Tatya Tope who was hanged. The folk story within the family was that, well, Tatya Tope went to live on as a sadhu, and no one really knows exactly what happened to him. But we actually made an important discovery. While doing a thorough research, we found an eyewitness testimony of Major Paget, who was a chief of artillery in Brigadier Somerset's column, and he actually witnessed Tatya Tope's death because of a cannon on January 1st, 1859, in a small town of Chippabarod in Rajasthan. And Tatya Tope actually died in battle. However, the Indian side did not want to disclose the fact that the general had died, which led to a series of events which finally led to the mock hanging of somebody who the English decided to hang, because Tatya Tope by that time had become a metaphor for freedom. So by hanging whoever was hanged, they were not hanging Tatya Tope, but they were hanging the metaphor for freedom.
Parag, how long did it take you to write this book? The kind of research you had to do, apart from, of course, traveling to various places.
Yeah, we all had to travel quite extensively. So we started in the middle of 2006, and the research was for over 3 years. So we had to travel extensively, traveling to different archives from Bhopal to Bombay to Delhi. I was traveling to libraries in Los Angeles and San Francisco, as well as getting material from my brother, sister, as well as my father while living in the US.
As is mentioned in the preface, while the book is most detailed account yet of Tatya Tope's contribution to 1857, it is certainly not definitive. At a minimum, it enforces the argument that the Indian history, particularly that of 1857, needs significant reassessment. The author has hoped that this makes a case and encourages the Indian academics to relinquish their revisionist outlook and take a fresh look at the Indian history. Sarita Brara in Delhi for the Literary Corner.